All right, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm here today with my really good friend and expert on light, sound, magnetism, vibration, all things sort of healing and frequency and stuff that doesn't sound real but is very real. Mr. Tom Butler. Welcome, Tom. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Sage. Good to join you here today. It's been too long. It's been way too long, actually.
It's been a minute. So, just for everybody who doesn't know, which is pretty much everybody, I met Tom in 2015. I bought my Livo 2 off of him about 10 minutes after a guy who bought a Livo 2, and everybody's heard of that guy. So early on, I got in with oxygen because the doctor that saved my life used Livo 2 to detox me, bring my body, my cellular infrastructure, all of it back to life, jumpstart mitochondria. That's a very hot topic we'll talk about a little bit. And so I became connected to Tom because of Livo 2, which is high O2, low O2. We'll explain what that is, altitude contrast, how it works in the body, and why. Tom, I've been coming to you for years now, 8 years, and all of this. So the hope today is to have a conversation around these things so that you can share what you know and what you've given to me with the rest of the world, and we can begin to give it to the world in a unique way. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started, what you know about oxygen and what you've learned about it and the mechanism of it and maybe how you've used it or seen it been used.
Mm-hmm.
Go.
Yeah, this is I prefer to go into story mode here, but it was something I had a lot of intrigue around, and I had played around a little bit with it as I was finishing up my traditional Oriental medicine program. And when we look at how the body, creates energy or maybe more appropriately has efficiency on the cellular level, we really can't do that without oxygen. So they're kind of things that I put out there as energy columns. When we're young, we have really great, robust energy columns. We have the endocrine system driving our body. We have a lot of movement. We have a lot of respiration. We have the best of it all. And we don't even know it. As we get into the third and the fourth and the fifth and sixth and seventh, how many decades of life are you planning for? But as those decades start to kind of rack up, we start to realize, oh, our energy columns are dwindling. So it's where we need to get into what I call the lifestyle of things. What do we need to do to support ourselves so we don't spend that, 2 decades of life in decline and going into more and more disorganization to end up in a position where we have a diagnosable disease, and then we're kind of too far gone, or we're deeper in the hole than we want to be. So the idea is these modalities, they need to be effective. We need to be after a therapeutic result. And then the other side of it is we need to have them easy enough to pull off that we can just fold them into our lifestyle. A lot of times it's not convenient to go across town and sit in a waiting room and wait to do one of these modalities. You got 15 minutes in the morning. Let's do it. It's completely a scenario of, are you willing to basically get off your anatomy, get moving? In this case, we're talking about getting oxygenated, but that's going to pay dividends in the short and the longer term game of this. And that's one thing that we have to look at more and more, is we can do things for a benefit, and maybe it's really short-sighted and it feels good. And sometimes when we're younger in life, it appears to be more of an amusement ride. Let me see if I can do this for 5 minutes at this certain level. But as you get into the decade of things, it's like, I need to be able to do this at a certain level, because it means I'm stronger than whatever the heck is going to maybe hit me today, or whatever might come out the woodwork and catch everybody off guard.
So tell me a little bit about the mechanism real quick of oxygen in that.
Yeah.
What is it about oxygen that mitigates in any of it?
Well, oxygen's like the universal softener, right? So when we think about aging, it's the body goes through this rigidity process, right? So are we actually, bringing in and pushing out enough air that that our body actually remains nice and soft. And I don't mean that soft in body composition. I mean, soft in terms of, are we flexible? Do we maintain our range of motion? And that might strike someone who's even familiar with oxygen as a little bit of an odd thing to say, but we have to maintain those balances. And my stove is beeping. So
That's hysterical. All right.
is it better to turn it off or
Yeah, let's take a minute here. Well, to pause. Here's the miracle magic of modern studio. All right, so we're back. Tom's stove was beeping. That happens. There you go. Life is happening while we're recording. This has been the last 8 years of our existence, so we're just sharing it with everybody. So, the mechanism of oxygen on the human body to bring back all of what you're talking about, pliability, youth, capacity to operate like you did when you were younger. How does that work with the live O2 or high O2, low O2 system? Like, what is altitude contrast? Why did that work so well for me? And what is it? We'll get into what we talked about and how we did it and different protocols. But what's the whole thing about high O2, low O2? And why is that important for any kind of healing or cellular optimization as an athlete? All of it.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about kind of this agent of softening, right? I prefer that viewpoint because it kind of gives us an idea of like dosage, right? You want enough of this that you get the benefit. But if you do too much, there's really no benefit to being overly pliable or too soft, or actually softening your cardiovascular system because you've kind of said, well, oxygen is the answer. It's not that oxygen is the answer. It's that breathing is the answer. And breathing combined with movement is, that's the ultimate. We can just enhance the way the body does that. So when we have a soft air, an oxygen air, we're using that to load the body at certain intermittent cycles where your body really needs it. It's really under demand. We're using everything else, room air, call it rarefied air, but really it's air with some oxygen stripped out of it. We're using that to actually challenge the body, right? If you're using an adaptive contrast setup or something maybe similar to EWAT, and you're not actually challenging your body to breathe harder and have an easier time on your day-to-day air, then we've unfortunately, there's a lot of misconceptions out there that might be a good idea. And I'm here to kind of say that's not a good idea, nor is going so far that we're creating physical adaptations in the body that might look like something an athlete would develop after being severely overtrained and burdening their cardiovascular system, right? So that's
huge.
Is we have to keep you in the range of what your body can actually do that's helpful, rather than allowing your body to get kind of overly adapted, and then you've got maybe even more of a problem than you originally had.
Talk to me about that, because right now we got a bunch of people grabbing pieces of equipment, and this is why we're having this series, because guess what? Anybody with a credit card and enough room on it can go buy all this stuff.
Yeah.
You could just end up doing it and using it. How can you possibly, I don't want to say wreck yourself or get it wrong, but what's the difference between optimization in all of this? And we're about to, everybody wait for it. We're about to jump into the mechanism of oxygen and infrared in a second. So we got to just sit with this oxygen thing for a second. What is it, Tom, about the potential to overdo, underdo? Let's talk a little bit about that line, and then maybe jump into Manfred, good old Manfred's work and how that coordinates.
I mean, I look at it as it's a fine line, and it's not a fine line of what you do. I just look at it as it's a fine line of awareness, right? If someone's training you, have they taken certain considerations into place? If you're training yourself, do you know what you're setting out to do, right? And this is it's simply observable, and it becomes repeatable when we ask your question, okay, I set out to do this, and then what actually happened? Right. So we want these things to be trackable, and the term biohacking, right?
That term.
something that there's a lot of attention around it, and it's a cool term and it draws you in. But before you're a biohacker, you kind of have to be a stacker, and then you have to be a tracker. And once you've completed those sides of it, then you actually have something to biohack, right? I mean, how many people are out there biohacking with like less than a quarter cup of, resources? And that's where you get into trouble, because you use those resources unwisely, and you maybe didn't produce a result. If you produced a result, it was probably just in the short term. So we really have to get into lifestyle. We have to figure out what works for an individual. And, one adage in Chinese medicine, the theory is you'll have as many, we'll call it diagnoses, as you have patients. So it's just a way of saying everybody's a little bit different. And then I go a step further. Everybody on any day is different. And that's like the reverence for like, okay, we're not just passing time. There's nothing that says like this second is identical to the next second. Yeah, they're really close, but everything's changed. And from that point, we start to realize in that second, like literally millions of interactions are happening in our body. We literally can't comprehend how smart our body is. So from that perspective, we start to have a little bit more reverence for, the time frames, what we're setting out to do. If we're setting out to break a pattern, then there's a certain guideline we can go for that. And it can be a very useful thing to do. But we don't want every one of our adaptive contrast sessions to go out and actually break a pattern. We have to we have to be deeper than that, right? We're not playing tic-tac-toe. We're not even playing chess. We're playing some three-dimensional chess game that we don't know all the levels. But if there's one thing you can be assured of, those levels will start to reveal themselves when your body starts to do new things. And we just have to have enough of this tracker and stacker mentality to say, okay, did I gain a little bit? Did I get a little bit better at a heart rate of 160 and produce a little bit more wattage while I was breathing through my nose, right? That's what you want to be dialed into. Is there is a proper way to do this, and for each individual, that'll change a little bit, and it'll change with time. But we're looking for that nice, just incline, that trajectory that says, okay, I'm getting faster at 160, and I'm noticing these really good developments in my day to day that mean maybe my 40s are a lot better than my 20s even. And that's the cool thing. That's where you're picking up 2 decades instead of losing 2 decades. Now, I don't think I began to answer your question.
You didn't, but that's okay, because we're going to go back to that in a second. What is high O2, low O2? Look, we're assuming a lot of stuff. People don't even know what altitude or adaptive contrast is. Basically 84% oxygen, 4 times ambient room air. And in hypoxia, right? You take the oxygen away, and going from high O2 to low O2, where everything opens up, causes vasoconstriction, vasodilation. We lose vascular brownouts, areas where there's disease. It actually reduces inflammation very quickly. And if you can get the toxins out after, instead of retoxing them, if you've got that gene like me, you can actually combine it and stack it with sauna and other things. So for those of you just listening who are like, what are they even talking about? It's a system that puts a lot of oxygen in a big bag, and you exercise while you're on it. You're talking, Tom, about very healthy people, though, getting some decades back, putting it on your body. What about me, 320 pounds, opioid dependent, barely able to walk, hopped on a system, could barely walk at 2.0 miles an hour. And here I am, ta-da, got better, right? Talk to me a little bit about that, but make sure this time also we sort of veer into sauna and Manfred Van Arden, because for the next conversation, we're going to bring in oxygen and infrared, and why and how light and oxygen have a synergistic approach. So yes, please answer the other question and then lead us into oxygen and magnetism in the next sort of 5 minutes, and we'll pick up in part 2.
It's all about, in this case, it's all about the starting point, right? You have to start, and it has to be at your pace. If we don't do that, we lose a little bit of your will to actually do more of this, right? You can really overtrain somebody. It's a fancy show trick to take somebody through detoxification, but is that really what they were ready for? Did they sign up for
Right.
that? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So have a little bit of reverence for just your own starting point and where you want to go. And know that you'll get there. Sometimes it's good to go fast, especially if there's a timeline. You know, a lot of folks have a recovery timeline and they need to hit it. Otherwise, I'd rather someone be much more consistent, and kind of dedicated to learning, you know, the methodology, the art and the science of, than jumping right in really excited, because I don't know that you actually gain that much after the first couple sessions. So when we get into high oxygen and low oxygen, what we're able to do in these adaptive contrast systems is we're able to take normal room air that's pretty heavy, and we can partition it out into air that's concentrated. It has more oxygen in it than the air that we breathe. And then we can have thick air, again, that has less oxygen in it. And the goal of this is to cycle between the two and create a pattern that maybe the body can never really get used to, but it is advancing our cardiovascular development. And there's a lot of opinions and or debate about what the proper levels are, right? And again, the proper levels depend on who you're working with and where they are. And they'll not, it's not that they'll never change. They will actually change, and you can, kind of recalibrate how you train by adjusting those levels. And that's the really great part of it. Now, Manford, if you're into this and you can ever get your hands on one of his oxygen multi-step books, I it's been a while, but I remember the pages of those books and how critical they are to actually looking at how we can recover using an oxygen modality.
We're talking about Manfred van Arden.
Yeah.
Swiss, right? Or German scientist, 60s, 70s. And he created a book that was the seminal work on oxygen and infrared and the synergistic relationship between the two, which you introduced me to, everybody. The reason I know any of this is because I got the book. I read parts of the book that I could. It's like an old 70s text, hard to read. Yeah. And then you started to talk to me about this. What did Van Arden discover about infrared and oxygen that sparked your interest and got you going down this whole path?
Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal in English, and it's near impossible in German. And I remember ordering a book and not really paying attention to what I was doing. I got one in German, and it's like,
oh man,
I did have 2 years of German, so this kind of makes sense. I spent a lot of times on the graph, and then I was like, okay, I need to get this in English. So it's decently translated, but the guy did an amazing amount of work on looking at kind of how we recover or how we don't recover from these events of life. And this is something that's relevant to all of us, is, how well did you recover from that strong version of the flu that went around last year? It laid everybody up. Well, how, did it get you? Are you still not recovered from it? Or did you actually bounce back from it? Or, or is that
hello dog? Or right?
or your dog can bark. Or, is there something else that's kind of not allowing us to move back? And a lot of times that something else is what's happening in the blood. We kind of got jammed up and gummed up. Yep. And now our blood, that's always on the verge of clotting, is now basically settling in our veins. And this is a disease mechanism, in my opinion, that precedes almost every disease that we have, is our blood becomes less mobile and less viable. And that means our body is working harder to push it around, but everything in our blood that our body is trying to signal to other mechanisms is basically, because it's stagnated, it's like those signals are getting drastically diluted. So when we get the blood moving, we actually have a physiology we can work with. And if we've got the blood moving and we've got the body oxygenated, then we actually have some cellular efficiency. We can have cellular efficiency And maybe the body's not even producing so much energy, and maybe we're not even using it wisely. But that tends to be the difference in terms of if we'll ever get out of the rut. At least that's the first level of making a difference. Now, when we start to talk about photobiomodulation, right? Raw energy source for the body. And we know the science of photobiomodulation takes us into ATP production and a lot of other great biological mechanisms. Now, that's all very true. But the challenge we have in all of this is we don't really know what viewpoint we're looking through when we look at a modality, right? Oxygen's pretty easy because it's a physical thing. We know we need it. If you don't believe me on that, hold your breath, right? We know we need it in a short amount of time, and we guaranteed that's a physical thing. It's in our physical world. So enough about that. When we get into photobiomodulation, that's energetic, right? It's not really so tangible. I mean, yes, we can see a photon go outside. It's sunny. Are you breathing that in? Well, sometimes we have the idea of we're soaking that in on our skin, and there is a biological mechanism to that. But what happens when the biological mechanism actually doesn't explain what's happening in our body? We have to go to a different thought process on that. And actually, it's, if you don't kind of honor it there, then you never really figure this out. So photobiomodulation is an energetic modality. Its mechanisms work more with the vital body, and vital body is just another way of saying energetic body, whichever you prefer. But that's one of the bodies we carry around with us, right? We're 3.8 billion volts. Some would calculate.
Wow.
We're right? It's like we're a bolt of lightning.
Wow.
So the idea is it's really well insulated and really well compartmentalized, but how many of your cells are actually at optimal levels of energy?
Right.
So quantum physics is what we have to go to when we start looking at these energy modalities. The problem is same with Chinese medicine, right? Because it's a vital body, you're never going to prove that there's an intelligent electrical system in the body. You'll never get that in a double-blind placebo study.
Right.
But please explain to me how the body works without something like that. We start to come up short for answers. And it's like, okay, just because we can't explain it through biology doesn't mean there's something that we don't know and mechanisms that we barely understand. But, I can say this best of anybody. I locked myself in the biochemistry closet for like decades, working in, development labs on proprietary chemical compounds, thinking that was the way. And it feels funny looking back at it, but until you have the experience of something else, you really kind of don't know. So if we put on our quantum physics glasses, we start to see the photons filling up the fabric that actually underlays our biology. And while we can't explain everything, it does make more sense of how our body becomes more efficient. And some of the top, molecular theorists out there, right? They look at molecules of our body. They look at structures like collagen, and they're like superconductor and insulator, right? And it's never that there's just energy in the body. It's always intelligent energy, right? So we can supply the body with dumb bulk energy. If the body decides to take it, it makes it intelligent. It's going to do something wildly smart with it.
Intelligent energy. Okay.
Yeah, right. Now, when we kind of look at structures like DNA, everybody would probably argue probably a pretty important structure in the body that the body spends a lot of time with. If we look at the embodied energy in DNA, it would probably blow our minds.
Yeah, dogga, go.
Hold on.
Finish that thought, and then we're going to wrap up and go to part 2.
Hey, what are you doing?
All right, everybody, while Tom's doing that, here's what he's talking about. Essentially, when you put infrared and oxygen together, what Manfred Van Arden discovered is that dis-ease disappears because it appears to re-regulate or auto-regulate. It's not that it's curing, and by the way, we're not treating, preventing, diagnosing, or curing anything. Neither of us is licensed to have an opinion per se on all of this and its conclusivity. However, adding infrared is our point to the oxygen process creates synergistic benefit at a cellular level in the body. And no one's talking about that. Oh, breathe like this. Oh no, use photobiomodulation. Nobody's talking about the composition of each energetically and how and why they seem to bring the dead back to life.
Right.
Hi.
Right.
So listen, we got about a minute. I want you to sort of wrap this up, and then we'll start with part two. We'll pick right up with Manfred Van Arden, oxygen, infrared, and then we'll add magnetism and PEMF, because we're really going to blow everyone's mind when we start thinking about, okay, the way you breathe has an electromagnetic impact on the body because breath is electric. We'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about oxygen and infrared. So finish that thought. Yeah. What is it infrared and oxygen does to the average individual who's going to get on it, or the very sick individual who's going to get on that kind of regimen? They're going to want to know. They're going to reach out to you and me. What do we do? How do we do it? Wrap this one up for me with a bow.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is an additive equation, right? So when we add photobiomodulation in and we look at the structures of the body, right? We were talking about DNA. It's not just a molecular structure that's smart and holds information. It's a vessel, just like the body's a vessel. Well, what's it supposed to hold? Well, some would argue that it holds photons. Maybe about 1,000 photons per molecule of DNA is a pretty good equation of your DNA making better decisions on what metabolic pathways it can run, how long you can run them, and actually what your physical body can do. So it all translates, right? So if we take a stupid car analogy, we want a car that's full of gas and gets really good mileage, right? And that's your additive equation. So we have, a 1 + 1. And when I say additive equation, anybody out there can get 1 + 1 = 2, right? Take that to the math colleges. They'll tell you that's exactly correct. Well, because we play in quantum physics and we can be a little creative, we can maybe eke out an equation that says 1 + 1 = 3, or maybe 3.5 or even 4. But this is the advantage of saying, okay, I'm full of photons, and it's appropriate to recognize yourself as a being of light, right? It's not the first time you've heard that.
And it's not just hippie talk, man. It turns out the hippies were right. They just need a translator.
It's real.
They can't explain any of it in language the rest of us want to apply.
Yep. And the other side of it is, if you have efficiency and you're actually working in aerobic land, the body works really amazingly well. You'll be revisiting your 20s. Now, what does it take to stay there? And that's the right amount of everything. We can't do this in disregard of nutrition and lifestyle and hydration and electrolytes. So it does return to biology, and we get to geek out on all these fun little supplements and things we can do to bring that 3.0 to 3.2. But the cool thing is, we need a backbone of just a way to navigate this. And we don't really get there through biology, but the place we get to is really cool. So
we're going to jump in on mineralization and myelination when we get into PEMF. Exactly. I think that's an appropriate place to stop. Everybody, this is Tom Butler. Tom Butler is my personal Yoda go-to. We've been having these conversations for hours on end for 5, 6, 7, 8 years now.
Yeah.
And now we're going to share them with you. So that is oxygen, the mechanism of high O2, low O2, adaptive contrast, altitude contrast, how it jumpstarts mitochondria, produces ATP. The functional effect is it can detox you. It detoxed me off of opioids, heavy metals, a lot of other stuff. And then I've been able to use the sauna and the infrared synergies that we're talking about to lose really an insane amount of weight, come back to life. And Tom knew me when I could barely walk and was in that 300-pound category. So light, sound, magnetism, starting with oxygen and infrared. Next episode, we're going to talk about oxygen, infrared, and magnetism, PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic fields. We'll talk about it from a Chinese medicine perspective and from a very Western applied perspective. Tom Butler, thank you very much. Appreciate you, buddy. We'll talk to you again.
Yeah, my pleasure.